Look familiar to anybody? This past week, Reverend Linda McDermott sent out an email asking people to answer a question in one word or phrase. And the question is, what distractions keep you from experiencing the presence of God? What distractions keep you from experiencing the presence of God? She got 150 responses to that email. I want to share some of those with you as we think about this together. Selfishness. Other people's demands. I can be very, very busy meeting responsibilities of the church while taking precious little time to acknowledge God's presence. It's exhausting and spiritually draining. Internet, computer, cell phones, television, the double-edged sword of technology, keeping up with emails, text messages, everyone expecting an immediate response, communication overload. Fear of being still and quiet, of confronting one's innermost thoughts. It's easier to be superficially busy. When I overextend myself and don't keep limits. Noise. Just the amount of money needed for needs is distracting. Illness. Focus on work. Busyness. Fires that must be put out right now. My own ego. I'm in a hurry. I don't have time. My to-do list of like 20 things, and all of them are a priority. Busyness. Deadlines. Relentless demands at work. Job and self-absorption. The times I don't pause to experience the sacred and often pass by without taking notice. Things. I think it was Frankl who wrote, "Things are in the saddle and ride mankind." Absent-mindedness, hectic, stressed life, the economy and its unfortunate effects, both personally and to the country, making ends meet, debt, money in general, worry, anxiety, time devoted to work, family, exercise, health, mental relaxation, sleep. Problems and concern that I don't turn over to God. Sadness, lack of intentionality, the life He gave me, what we are witnessing concerning change in the world, concern for children and grandchildren's future, work and play, attachment, stress, worry, and Facebook, a distracted mind. I'm too focused on the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Everybody else's presence. Worldly distractions, the stresses of my life, my limited self, my ego, television, demands from society to always be on the go, lack of focus, the voice inside me that is not God or the Spirit, but my humanness, my ego, little details of everyday life, myself, television, sleep, computer, finding quality time, the rat race, the daily grind, just getting through another day, exhaustion from taking care of business or family commitments, indecision, cell phones, TV, people talking on cell phones in public. I don't experience God's presence in my life, somebody wrote. Technology, the inability to pause and just listen, day-to-day life demands. Too much email. I'm distracted by my desire to ensure God's presence in my children's life that I forget to acknowledge my own life. Work. My job is 24/7, 365. We're always on call, and no vacation is without constant email. I think the biggest thing is technology. Someone wrote how we went in the last decade to being 24/7 all the time. Our smartphones, email, Facebook, Twitter, etc. We focus more on always being more in touch with others than spending some quiet time with God. And I think one of my favorites was this one. Too many emails from my church. Well, what can we say? Does any of that mean something to you? You identify with any of those words? I think there's something in there for everybody, and perhaps there are some of us who identify with every single one of those statements that I read, and I only read about 2/3 of them. Distraction. In the season of Lent, our purpose is always to see if we can focus ourselves a little more, or perhaps a lot more, on the things of God and who God calls us to be and what God calls us to do. And in this season of Lent, we are looking at encounters that Jesus has with people. And in those encounters, Jesus calls people to confront something within themselves. Last week, we confronted our brokenness. Those places in our lives where we are broken. And we imagined Jesus standing before us saying, as he did to the blind man by the side of the road, "What do you want me to do for you? What is your brokenness? What do you need? What do you want me to do for you?" And this morning we imagine Jesus confronting us with our distractions and calling us to confront our priorities. Now let me hasten to say that I know priorities is not necessarily the correct way to use that word. When I was in Georgetown, which of course is the home of Southwestern University, I talked about priorities in a sermon one time, and I got a letter from an English professor in which she reminded me that you can only have one priority. I mean, the word itself kind of means that. Well, I thanked her for her letter, and we had a conversation about that, in which I said, well, wait a minute, though. That's not the way we use that word. In common English, we talk about more than one priority because we seem to lack the ability to narrow it down just to one, and we have to think about how all of those things rank in our lives. There's priority 1 then, and priority 2, and 3, and 4, and so on. When I was in seminary, I had a professor who talked about priorities and about ethical decision-making in terms of the covenants that we have. Because he recognized that we don't only have one covenant. We have many. Covenant with God, covenant with spouse, covenant with children, covenant with church, covenant with school, covenant with friends, covenant with employer, covenant with employee. And the list goes on and on and on. Our lives are full of covenants. And so our ethical decision-making and the prioritizing of our lives always involves managing these covenants and deciding which one in this particular situation takes priority over the others. So I'm going to stick with that sermon title, Confronting Your Priorities. How are all those covenants in your life? Our text is the story, of course, of Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha have Jesus and his disciples in their home. It's an important time in the ministry of Jesus because they are on their way to Jerusalem on this journey. We've read earlier on that Jesus has set his face for Jerusalem. That is, he is committed to going to Jerusalem. And of course we know in Jerusalem is where ultimately he will be arrested and he will be put to death on a cross. But he has committed himself to do that. He has set his face for Jerusalem. And on the way, he stops at the home of these friends. And Martha is extending hospitality to Jesus. It may be that Mary had done a lot in preparation for Jesus' coming, had been working also. She probably had to get ready for that. But Martha was busying herself with all sorts of things because hospitality is a sacred duty. It's one that we don't always take seriously. But in that time and place, in that culture, hospitality was very significant. It was a holy duty. It was God's work to extend hospitality to anyone who came. Mary was busy with hospitality. Mary was sitting at the feet. Martha was busy with hospitality. Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening and learning. Now that's remarkable in itself, because in that day and time, a woman would not sit at the foot of a rabbi and learn. In fact, there were rabbis who said that it would be better to burn the Torah than to teach it to a woman. That was the culture we're talking about here. Not only this culture of hospitality, but a culture that is over against women learning the Torah. And yet, here we have Jesus being hospitable to her and welcoming her in among the disciples as he teaches. She's fully a part of this conversation. And Martha is not happy about that, because Martha is doing all the work now, and Mary is just sitting there. So immediately we have this conflict between these sisters, Mary and Martha. And it's a conflict that really persists everywhere, doesn't it? It persists among sisters, for sure. It persists sometimes in the church. Distinctions about who's a Mary and who's a Martha. Who is more the studious type, the one who sits and learns, and who are the ones that roll up their sleeves and get all the work done. The Marys and the Marthas. We'll come back to that in just a moment, but for right now I want us to focus on what Jesus says to Martha. When Martha complains, he says, "Martha, Martha, you are distracted by many things." And I love that word distracted because the Greek word means dragged around. Isn't that interesting? I think we ought to translate it that way. Martha, Martha, you're dragged around by many things. You're pushed and pulled this way and that by all sorts of things. Isn't that true for us? We just heard the list a moment ago. We're dragged around by many things. So what do we do about that? Let's think about that for a few moments. First, we decide, what are our primary covenants? What is most important in our lives? Deciding with intention what is most important, carefully, and thinking about that, running through that list in our minds every day, if we can, at least a few times a week, what really is most important. If we don't do that, we get covered up with that which is not important. If you've read Steve Covey, you know that he says our focus should be on what is important, because there are a lot of things that are urgent that are not important. Some things are urgent and important, but most of the time that which is urgent is not as important as that which is not urgent. The most important things, more often than not, have no urgency. If you think about our task of being good parents, is there really urgency in that? There may be a lot of little tasks that are urgent, but that focus on what it means to teach our children and to be good parents and grandparents, it can be not urgent at all. We just sort of go along and everything just kind of happens because there's no urgency for paying close attention to that and really focusing on the whole scope of our parenting. That's just one example. It can happen in our jobs, it can happen in our marriages, where that which is really important doesn't cry out for attention like all those little urgent things. So what's most important? That's our first task. Jesus told Martha that Mary had chosen the better portion. I like Eugene Peterson's translation of that, his paraphrase of that. He says, "Martha, Martha, you are distracted by many things. Mary has chosen the main course." That's a good translation, isn't it? In the midst of all this busyness of preparing food, Jesus says, Mary has chosen the main course, that which is most important. What is the main course for you? What's most important in your life? That's what we're called to focus on. And it makes all the difference in the world. Many years ago, Charles Schwab was president of Bethlehem Steel. And he brought in Ivy Lee as a consultant. Well, Ivy Lee made an appointment to see him, wanting to be his consultant. And he said, "Give me an opportunity to present this to you. It'll make a big difference in your company." And Charles Schwab's response was, "I tell you, I will try it out, and then if it works, if it makes a difference, I will pay you what you ask within reason." So all he did, Ivy Lee, was take a piece of paper and handed it to him. And he said, "I want you to make a list of all the important things that you have to get done tomorrow, but I want you to rank them in order of importance. And think through it carefully. What's the most important, second most important, and so on. Rank that list in order of importance." And after he'd done that, he said, "Now, tomorrow morning, get up and start working that list with number one and complete number one. Not just part of it, but completely finish what's on the first line of your list. then go to the second one, and then the third one, completing each one. You won't get through the whole list, but you will have accomplished the most important things, and you will feel a great sense of accomplishment. Now do that for 30 days, and if it seems to work for you, then have everyone in your company begin to practice this. And sometime later, Charles Schwab sent a check to Ivy Lee for $25,000. It was worth it. All he did was say, decide what's most important and let that be your focus for the day. And it made a big difference. Enough difference that many years ago he paid $25,000 for that simple piece of advice. The second thing is, decide what's not important. Rank near the bottom of your list that which tends to be small distractions that get in the way and take you away from that which is most important. This is a hard thing to do. I think it's harder to do this than it is to decide what's most important in our lives. What are the distractions? What are the habits that we have? What turns our attention someplace else away from that which is really important? We saw it just a moment ago. This poor soul struggling to get one thing done, but all of these pathways branch off. And it's all a bunch of little stuff that doesn't amount to anything. It's that stuff that can really derail us. It's that little stuff that can actually damage our relationships. It's the little stuff that can lessen our ability to be faithful to all those covenants that we have. I think about the story of Flight 401 from New York to Miami. I think it was 1972. They were on final approach over the Everglades, and they deployed the landing gear, and the indicator light showing that the landing gear was down did not come on. Well, of course, the first thing one checks is whether or not the light is burned out. In those days, it was a light bulb. And so they started trying to get the light bulb out, and the engineer was not able to do that. It was stuck, jammed, and other flight crew members started trying to work on this light bulb. And they all became fixated on a 75-cent light bulb, not knowing that the plane was in descent the whole time, and it crashed into the Everglades. A 75-cent light bulb, the smallest thing one can imagine on an airliner, brought the whole airliner down because they were wrapped up and distracted by that little thing. As we think about confronting our priorities, we must think about the little distractions each day that would derail us. Perhaps a good exercise is in the evening to think back over the day. What did I spend my time doing, and what took me away from that which was most important? And did that matter? Those little distractions. And then finally, we need balance in our lives. Balance. You see here on the communion table some scales. And you see little slips of paper. And on those slips of paper are written all of the responses that Linda received to her distracting email that went out to the congregation. All of those distractions in the balance. Reminding us that what we're really talking about is a balance in our lives. And this is where we come back to Mary and Martha. You've probably been through those personality inventories in your place of business. Perhaps at the church. We've used several of them here. Strengths Finder is the most recent one we've used here, but we've used many of them. And all of them tend to kind of divide people along the Mary and Martha line. All of them do. Now, they go deeper than that, and they're more nuanced than that, but there is this basic divide between those who sort of live in the head and those who live through hands and feet, those who are more the scholarly type and those who are more action-oriented, those who are the thinkers and those who are the doers. There's kind of that divide. The reality is that we need both. What would the church do without the Marthas that we have? What would any of us do without the Marthas in our life? In fact, what would we do without that part of ourselves that is Martha, in addition to the part of ourselves that is Mary? I believe the question that Jesus poses is one of context. He is not saying that what Martha is doing is not important. But at that moment, Mary had chosen the main course, that which at the moment was most important. I like what a scholar named Gilchrist says about this. He says that we tend to fall into two theological errors when we approach Mary and Martha. On the one hand, the theological error, he calls it tube theology, says that we're basically conduits. We're tubes, and God works through the conduit, and we're more or less passive to allow God to work through us. And the tendency is to say, well, I'm open and God will take care of it, when you get over on that far end of the spectrum. The other one he calls bootstrap bootstrap theology, in which one pulls oneself up by his or her own bootstraps. That is, we do it. It's all our doing. And in between is this combination of the two, this interplay of the two, he says, that really gets at the truth. And he simply calls that synergy. Sin means together with, in the Greek, ergon, working together with God. Paul uses that image all the time, that we are partners with Christ. We are partners with God. God is at work. We're at work in partnership. It's bringing Mary and Martha together in balance. And that's the key for getting our priorities straight. I want to close with kind of an unusual image, I guess, or story. It comes from City Slickers. You know the movie? Billy Crystal and some friends, Billy Crystal's character and some other friends are approaching midlife, and they've all got problems in their lives, and so they decide to go to this dude ranch, and they're going to move this cattle herd from one place to the other. And there is this old cowboy named Curly, played by Jack Palance. Kind of a creepy guy in a way, a man of very few words, says almost nothing. They believe he is the toughest, meanest, wisest man that they have ever met. And they're all respectful of him, but they're all kind of afraid of him too. Billy Crystal's character asks him how he endures all the hardships and how he does what he does. And his answer is, I only need one thing. That's it. Never says what the thing is. Billy Crystal's character is tormented throughout the movie. What is the one thing? And that's the question for us today. What is the one thing that's needed? What is the one needful thing? That English professor at Southwestern University would say to me, yes, that's the question. It's not priorities. It's priority. What is the one thing that's needed? What is it? I believe the one thing that's needed is to so order our lives after the example of Christ. We said it a moment ago. The one thing that's needed is our relationship with Jesus Christ. It's the one priority that can help us to order our lives in such a way that we can manage all of those covenants and all of those competing priorities, and we can make decisions about what's important and what's a distraction when we so order our lives. What about you in your life? What is the one thing that's needed? The main course. Let's pray. O God, enable us by your grace to confront the priorities in our lives so that we would order our lives around the one priority of our relationship with you in Jesus Christ. That we would so order our lives after the example of Christ that all the covenants within our lives would be in their proper place. And we would discern what is important and what is a distraction. Enable us, O God, each day, by your grace, to discern this. In Jesus' name, amen.